speaker, the second one, Andy Stirling. It's a great honor for the department, for me personally, for the organizers to have Andy as second keynote speaker of this Go Just workshop. Andy is a leading figure in STS and critical science and technology policy and science and technology politics. He is now emeritus in SPRU, Sussex, and he is very much into the heart of all the discussions in this workshop because he is very much a central figure in the protectionist approach in science and technology studies. So, Andy will talk about branching pathways in agroecological transformations and murmurations. So, a very provocative title. And once more, Andy, thank you so much for honoring us with this keynote, and the floor is
Well, thank you. You're too kind, quite literally, and the honour is all mine. I'm so grateful for the invitation, and I'm so grateful to everyone in the room for the conversations we've been having so far, which have been extraordinary. So thank you to everyone for that. I hope there aren't any collapses during this, but I'll try to be provocative, but try to do that and maybe collapse from rage or from boredom, I don't know, but I'll try and deliver something. And yes, this is, what a load of words there. I will try and justify that at the end. I won't give you a preview now, I'll take you through. But I can't possibly do justice to the themes that have been going. And the talk would be a lot better if I'd written it in the light of these discussions, which I will do next time. So thank you for that. But this is where I am at the moment, and there will be a number of little riffs with things that I will try to point up. But you will spot many more depths that I owe. So let's move straight on, because we come up here with issues about the structures that not only research on transformation is trying to grapple with, but those same structures shape research itself. We're moving then straight into, we talked about relationality a lot, we are right there moving out of, the page comes out of us, we're in the page with our objects, especially when we're talking about transformation. So then, and of course nowhere do we hear, and we've heard it many times from many different directors, I'd love to do a taxonomy of real world talk. It's because I do it, we all do it in different ways when we're making a point. But the real world, especially if you want to do justice to the importance of the social justice issues, the environmental issues around transforming agriculture, you need to know thyself. Research needs to know itself. It cannot just speak of what it's looking at. It has to speak of what it is experiencing in looking at that. And so my first step then to that, which does not again do justice to it, is to think about a phrase that's come up repeatedly. It's a core organising principle, highly problematic, crucially important, sustainability, where you see, and it's going to be a helter-skelter talk this, to keep into time, but the voice of the UN, more than 190 countries, in pursuing these agendas that we're talking about, ecology and justice, they say they want to transform our world. We all know this, but it's worth 190 countries saying. Do they mean it? Obviously not. But what a resource. And yet, if you ask, as I've done and other colleagues have done on a number of occasions, I mentioned the IPBES process, if you ask, okay, transform from what? Don't talk about the thing that you're trying to transform away from. I mentioned in IPBES, don't mention capitalism, but a feature of capitalism, crucial though it is to understanding as an idea and as a formation in the world to the issues we're talking about, so no disrespect to that as a focus. But one thing we know from the 17 goals, 169 targets, is capitalism may be too big to talk about, but it's too small to do justice to sustainability. Because, you know, fascism, pretty bad. Communism, state communism, Stalinist. Maoist, not so good on a lot of counts or in the SDGs either. So, there you go. Capitalism's too small. And yet it's too big to speak of. So, know thyself, there are things that we can't say in our research. When we're supposed to be our most grounded and clear, say what you mean, say policymakers. Well, actually, capitalism, oh no, don't mean that. So, we need to, first of all, before we even begin, just be accountable, be rigorous, be serious about ourselves. What is it that the transformation is from? Why do we not speak of this more? And of course, that doesn't mean there's one thing we all have to agree. I call it, for reasons I could defend, and I'm quite passionate about, colonial modernity. It's modernity and coloniality. They're absolutely in lockstep. I'll say something about that. But my main point is not what you call it, not the category. It's a set of relations it entails to think about that and acknowledge that we are immersed in the thing that we are trying to transform as researchers. So then, what then constitutes that subjective condition for research? Before we even look, what will we see? You know, to someone with a hammer, every problem is a nail. Well, we have some hammers and various things. We've even talked about it here. So what will we see, even before you look at the object, what will we see? Well, it's pretty clear, I think, and again, I'm not going to be really being sufficiently scholarly about this. There's plenty of likewise, I'm very happy to send papers that substantiate this, at least to my satisfaction. Modernity, I believe, is a formation constituted by a metastasized imaginary of control. It has a hammer, that hammer is control. Everything it looks at, it imagines control. That's not only, it doesn't imagine control is good, it imagines it's the only possibility for agency. So whether it be in all these canonical, you can go through social theory, political theory, and see these canonical definitions of what forms modernity, the thing we're in, the thing we're trying to transform in some way. It's control of identities, control of culture, control of thought in reason, control of economies by capital, control of production by industrialization, control of the administering of organization by bureaucratization, control of the envisioned paths for progress. And I put some of the grand theories, of course, all in the European tradition of modernity here to indicate what I'm trying to get at. It's all about control. I've not seen this really brought out, but I believe it's kind of obvious if you look for it. So what will we see as little currants in the bun, in the cake of modernity? We'll see control. We'll see it out there, and we will see it as an imperative. Our only notion of how you transform is, well, obviously you've got to control something. What shall we control? Now that doesn't mean it's wrong, it just means we would see it anyway. So the fact that so many frameworks and understandings, political, radical, conservative, whatever flavour, whatever discipline, look at it in terms of control types of frameworks, they would see that anyway. It doesn't mean it's wrong, it just means don't take that as an evidence point. Now, what else do we know? I mean, forgive me again for this sort of prosaic going through other things we know about control. Is it control obsessive because we are modernity? So control is a means by which to justify, a term we've discussed, domination. Very different from control. Domination involves, as instantiated, and we're very familiar with the colonial background, which incidentally, in the research eliciting these dimensions of modernity, none of them, I won't talk about the research now, but none of them, coloniality doesn't come out. Modernity you can't see its single most important constituting background. But let's leave that to one side. It doesn't mean that modernity or coloniality is controlling the world. It's that the fiction that it is what allows these real processes of categorization. We've talked again about many of these in the work we've done. Standardization, stratification, appropriation, extraction, concentration, accumulation. That is what colonial modernity has been about. And if we, so you can underscore this by just looking at some figures who are at the apex of their structures of agency. Harold Macmillan arguing the apotheosis of British imperial power. What do you fear most, sir? Events, dear boy, events. This is not what someone in control of anything says. Rahm Emanuel, President of the USA, with a particularly vigorous agency in the form of Barack Obama. Rahm Emanuel said the only way he was going to get his #1 thing through on his program was don't let a crisis go to waste. The most powerful in the agents of the world don't control. They surf events. But they have to tell stories of control to justify this. That's the dynamic at the core, I would contend. And what then happens are undoubted structures of domination, extraction, appropriation. Here are the principal cable connectivities of imperial times in the late 19th century. Here are the trade routes, pretty much the same. Anyone doubting the hardwired nature of coloniality? Some of these maps, I get too excited about these things. There we have the internet, same structure. Here we have the possession of nuclear weapons. Those nodes are the places that are most able to obliterate the entire world at minutes' notice. Here you have concentration of billionaires, the same basic blobs. The money seems to be going where the capability of destroying everything most concentrates. And then here, in the light of Gaza, it's been raised. But we can't forget these realities of how the world is. If we're talking about transformation, is it a world in which there are the SDGs and everyone's saying, oh, how can we do this? Let's ask some academics. Probably they should be transdisciplinary, so we really get a good understanding of what we need to do. It's not what the world is about. When they ask us about transformation, they are not asking these interests that are responsible for the world. It is, here are the wars. And this is up to 2020, so Gaza's not on there, but you can, the structure of violence on which this is built is undeniable, even in the present world. What that means is open for discussion. I just say this in the start way I do, because unless we speak of this, when we talk about transformation, be it in agriculture or anywhere else, we're not serious. So, better talk about agriculture. Right, Stafford? The transition to agroecology, which has been coming up in all kinds of really inspiring and fertile ways here, is obviously not self-evident. And the scope of these different kinds of attributes, dimensions, dispositions in what we're calling just agriculture, sustainable agriculture, agroecology are vast. They include agricultural and food practices. You'll have noticed my personality defect already to list things as a sort of proxy for scholarliness. But you won't need me to identify all these, but a vast array, and this is accountable again. This is the scope of kinds of things I'm speaking of when I speak about transformation. Some of them will be more important to some people than others, some of them may be seen as a problem. But there's no doubt that these kinds of configuration, the agroecological transition that we speak about, why are we saying the, when there are so many contending dimensions to it, and every one of us, if we were to put a chart up like this, I think we would come up with a completely different chart than me. But I think we wouldn't dispute the broad salience of these kinds of dimensions. So those are agricultural practices. There's husbandry techniques. Sorry, those are more techniques, the social aspects of technique and technology. These are more food practices as well as leading into agriculture. Again, participatory extension services, box schemes, fair trade, regulations that have catalytic effects, again, cropped up in many occasions here. And then we have a whole set of dimensions. I'm not giving you time to look at this because I know somebody's going to say, that's not right, Andy. That's not a valid example. But here we have cultural, political, institutional change. Again, we're cropping up repeatedly here and in wider discussions about what constitutes the direction in which these notional just agriculture, agroecological transitions are going. Now, just in my chart here, which I did think about quite hard, and it's come out of a strand of work I've done over many years on agroecology, which I'm not an expert on, but I have worked on it a number of times. And my partner, my maiden formative influence on this, has worked on it her whole life, not as an academic. There's 30 dimensions in what I've put out. The number's not significant. What happens when you take 30 dimensions? What are the combinations? 30. That's about 25 with 32 zeros after it. The ways in which you can combine these elements. Now I know this is a trivial, non-rigorous way of speaking, but it's remarkable that we formulate these things as singular. When what we know in this group doesn't need reminding about the devil is in the detail. These are fractal structures. It really matters how you combine things, exactly how much of this with that, crucial details. So it really does matter how these things combine, and of course there are many more. To talk of the transition is an absurd fiction. Even, it's just absurd. Because it's so open, and that's without any uncertainties. Just deterministically is a vast space of possibilities. Political as well as in other respects. So, what then about this control theme I began with, and then put that on to what I've just been talking about? Well, we know that modernity and us as embedded in modernity will see this challenge in certain ways. We'll see it in the lens of control. I just want to say a bit, because it's crucial, what I mean by control. Used in many different ways. And I've already said that coloniality, modernity does not control, it imagines it does. The paradigm is of operating with a functioning machine, as I'm kind of doing now, where you have one-to-one correspondence between your inputs, you have a particular intention, a particular intervention, and then there's an outcome. It seems extraordinarily eccentric that agency should work like that, with no gaps, no collateral effects, no feedback. It seems an extraordinary abstraction. But that's our everyday experience a million times. We switch on our light switch, we get our bicycle, turn to the left, we press a button on the keyboard. That is how our experience of operating with a functioning machine works. So that is a kind of agency. It's not abstract, it's very concrete. We know it. And what has happened is modernity has taken that experience of operating a functioning machine and extrapolated, I said, metastasized to everything in society and the world. It should be like this, as if no other kind of agency exists. Well, of course, in the private domain, there does exist many other kinds of agency. Immersion, care, love, wu-wei, action with non-action. Fatalism, grace. The language will vary. I'm going to highlight care, but not because there's a dichotomy, control care, just because there's other stuff. That's a bit like with indigenous diversity. There's other kinds of agency we do every day. But the only ones that are entrenched in public institutions, in modernity, in different ways, admittedly around the world, it's not homogeneous, is control. So it's not that control is bad, it's just we've become fixated by it in our civilization to a degree that's shocking. So, where did it pop up? Well, of course, smart farming, gene editing, synthetic meats. The fictions and fallacies of control there are really obvious, I think, don't need to be dwelt on, but not just in the entrenched, incumbent directions for change in agriculture. A little bit more challenging also in many of the things that are supposedly resisting those. Sustainable intensification, the idea that we can modulate and control with fine granularity how agriculture unfolds, such that we can be in a position to exercise agency over what's intense and what's extensive. Agroecosystem services, many honourable people working genuinely with real conviction on these issues, and thinking that the best way of doing it is extending agroecosystem services to agriculture, controlling the inputs to the models, monetary values. I'm not trying to dismiss or be disrespectful to these bodies of practice. I'm just analytically saying they are controlling. Even when we talk of resilience, which is supposedly what happens when engineers recognize the limits to control paradigms, we still have these notions. It becomes a control template again, I would say. So it's not just the thing we're criticizing, the incumbent direction for change. It's the way we're approaching transformation itself that is influenced in these ways. And it's not alone. This is not a criticism of our field. It's everywhere I've encountered, across sustainability, across transformation talk, nudge, energy transitions or transitions of any kind, transition management, the clues in the word, the nexus, planetary boundaries. I can't go in now, but these are all control paradigms on steroids. The precision, the performed categorization of as if these things actually exist. We've got a word for it, so it must exist, right? Because of our word. Look at our word. The assumption that your words exist as phenomena. The Anthropocene, this fascination in a wildly ironic way, existential risk. These are different frames all used at transformation. They're all examples of this cockpit mentality, control anxiety. And what's crucial about this is that it generates, first of all, the thing that's come up, there is no alternative to the way forward. There's a way forward, right? Politics talks about it. Academics who are courting impacts from policy talk about it, the way forward, without even attending to the obvious thing that it does depend on which way you're facing. So, this extends, I won't spend a lot of time on this chart, but I think you can go into quite granular detail. Other people have done it better than me, looking at some of these tools, ecosystem services, risk assessments, the tools, the nitty-gritty modelling tools, where a lot of, again, huge expertise and good faith is exercised. Present pictures like this, with precision, whatever the metric might be, as if, and we talked about it yesterday with the models in Thessaly, that, in fact, to the credit of the project, was identifying lots of variability across sites, but there probably is no site that's so specific that there's still one answer for that site. This is much more, and these gradations here are typically whether we're using risk assessment, life cycle assessment, decision analysis. I haven't encountered any tool of policy making as used, for instance, in transitions or innovation policy or other social ecological fields. There's no, I would contend, there is no technique that does not show you that if you use the same model that's typically presented an answer to policymakers, here is an ordering of our policy options for transformation, A, B, C, A is better than B, B is better than C, where if you just tweak the model in a tiny way, you won't reverse. In other words, you can get any answer you like from these precious tools of modernity. Any answer you like within the bounds of rigor. What determines the answer is power. And it's not corruption, it's just, it's justification that we talked about again yesterday. Academics are thinking, well, what will fly? I realise this is it, shall I stop? Is it too provocative or too glib? And, climate, I've worked on climate since the 80s. It's hugely important. It matters enormously, but it's utterly saturated with this syndrome, such that we've gotten ourselves, because instead of doing value-based campaigning that movements against other environmental problems did in the past, it's a control-based campaign now. It's about, we've done the models, the global climate is static, we want a 1.5 degree outcome to our model, 2100, maybe 2 degrees if we're not. It's extraordinary discourse, which lost every other environmental issue that environmentally gained in its first half century. And now somehow the environmentalists are thinking, let's use that thing that failed against us all this time, this control imaginary, and use that. And of course we end up with negative emissions technology, that's climate geoengineering featuring as a largest single chunk of the supposed way to achieve it. I'm trying to underscore this because the imaginaries that we take for granted in the policy world, in the world of critical environmental approaches that come up behind, for instance, agroecology, are so warped by these imprints, I think, that it's really quite stark. So, again, I won't go into the detail. I would be really interested if anyone does want to look at these and riff on some of these themes. I put this in some of the discussions we've had today and yesterday. These features of modernity are really there in how sustainable farming is not only characterised but pursued. Modernity has colonised its own critique. So modernity has colonised its own critique because it's being criticised for not being controlling enough, when the problem is it's trying to be controlling. You need to control more. And I think it was a great conversation we had about, when you say play their own game. What was the phrase? Do you want to?
Oh, beat them at their own game.
The trouble with trying to beat at your own game is if the game was the problem. They aren't the problem. They're embedded in it like currents in a bun like you are. You're all in it. The game is the problem. You beat them at their game. You play their game and you just reproduce the problem. So I won't. I want to spend the last part of the talk on positive things, but I just wanted to underscore that point here. It's not alone, but you see categorization, extraction, standardization, appropriation, securitization, patronage, stratification in the tools that we're using routinely and in the prescriptions that we're making. Divide and rule, control itself. So I'm sorry to be so harsh, but I just think this is, it's not exactly right, but it's kind of right. And the implications are huge if we really take transformation seriously, not as an academic activity or a policy domain, but we actually want to achieve transformation. Because what does this mean? It's impossible? I don't think so. Because society has achieved amazing progressive transformations. Oh, sorry, this is me driving it home much more. This is Jim Lovelock. We need to put democracy on hold for a while. Where this leads is, this is an incredible authoritarian discourse. When environmentalism and social justice adopt this discourse in progressive idiom, as EurActive said when reporting on a major study a couple of years ago, democracy is the enemy of nature. That's EurActive, it's not Trump. the progressive media outlet. What's happened here is when we see this authoritarian backlash remarkably coordinated around the world nationalistically, why are these hyper-nationalists collaborating with such solidarity and coherence across their national divides that they supposedly care about so much? Because they're reacting to something, and that thing is us. Progressive, academic, sustainability-inclined movements who think the way to achieve these progressive ends is by control. And they think, okay, we'll do our control. We see ourselves in the mirror, I think, because we've allowed our movements, and I say that advisedly, movements. I know it's not self-evident why I would call it us and movements, but I'll try and defend that. So, look at the example, and of course we'll all draw different lessons, we'll all have different points of history to look at. I stand to be corrected on this, but I would say whatever struggles we look at for women, workers, colonised peoples, disabled peoples, oppressed people of all kinds, to the extent that transformative change has occurred in some parts of the world, and it has, how was that achieved? Was it achieved by a control agenda? Going to the cockpit, pulling some levers? Absolutely not. Academia, business, government, the natural sites of these things that we're trying to petition to transformative change and say, please, here's something for your dashboard. They oppose it tooth and nail, being at control. It's not about dashboards, it's not about measuring stuff, it's not about having different phases of the change all mapped out by the academics. That's not how they were achieved. So I don't know how we got into the idea, as they say in our theory of change. If anything, this is my highly imperfect struggle to articulate what was involved, to be accountable, because it's not enough to criticise, is flocking motions, just like you can see, for instance, in Brighton, near where I live, on the end of the pier, these exquisitely choreographed movements of birds, fish do it too. When the time is right, these will just change. Fashion does it in a more trivial way, but very savingly. Social phenomena are kind of clearly operating that way. There's no cockpit, no one's controlling this, there's no lead bird. It's horizontal, rhizomic coordination that does this. That's how transformation takes place. If you impose a control imagery on it, you destroy the murmuration. And ironically, in an exquisite example of its own wisdom, language, and this is true, I'm so impaired linguistically, it's true in English, I suspect it's true in other languages. The word murmuration in English means two things, strangely. One is the movement of birds, especially starlings. The other is suppressed descent. On a ship, the captain hears murmurations. He looks out and he sees murmurations of birds, he hears murmurations before the mutiny. What an amazing, that's 17th century, that usage. So language is telling us something too, in a murmurating way. So, and I obviously am in danger of romanticising social movements. I've already criticised everybody for being subject to the control imagery, including me. Look at the way I'm labouring this as a control strategy in my presentation. So I don't romanticise civil society. And of course, this is not a point about left-wing civil society, progressive civil society. It applies equally to the right, whatever the orientation. This is how change of any kind occurs. As we're seeing, when we look, ironically, at the right doing it, well, we still cleave to the institutions we think we're opposing. So, this is what it would look like. This is what, if you don't see mess, you're not seeing transformation. It's what it looks like from this real dynamics, I would contend, again, being inappropriately assertive. So, I will now try and just wind up by giving a few more slightly concrete points for the enthusiasm that I'm conveying this with. In distinguishing, it's not a dichotomy, it's a distinction. It's a distinction with many dimensions, and as I mentioned, there are other things which we could distinguish. So again, let's not slip into that reflex of when we see something distinguished, which is about being rigorous and accountable, we then say, oh, I don't like dichotomies. If you don't like distinctions, you don't like thinking. So here are dimensions, all of which are independent of each other to a large degree. They're all related, but they're independent. So the distinction operates on many dimensions it's separately, so it's not a fixed contrast. I'm also not saying control boo, care hooray. I'm saying control has metastasized in the public domain. It's the only way we think we can operate in modernity. There are, when I listed those characteristics of modernity, many of them are formative on me. Control over life course, control over reason, democracy, imagined control over society. Incredibly important to, for instance, not that anyone's interested, but to my own identity. So these fictions of control are formative for me, some of them. So I'm not saying bad and then good. I'm just saying let's see the alternative space that's eclipsed out when, for instance, we talk about social ecological transitions. So singularizing imaginations rather than plural. Separation of knowledge and action. The idea first we need to know and then we can act. Rather than, well, we're never going to know unless we act. Knowledge comes from action. Of course, for academics, it's very privileging to say this, because we're the purveyors of knowledge, so therefore we can claim the status of the originators of change. But in fact, what we're looking at over our shoulders, what change is happening, how can I be implicated in that? So, knowledge and action is more entangled. Categories, relations, we've talked about in really interesting ways here. Visionary leadership, you could say hubristic body language, humility, which is often decried if you advocate humility in transitions or transformation circles. Yeah, not too much though, Andy, please, because how are we going to change it? And ironically, I'm being so hubristic in the way I'm putting this over, but it's like a funny old world, isn't it? Technological solutions, social innovations, cultural creativity, many of the most important factors of actually not just social innovations, but creative arts. The sort of cultural revolution of the 60s was nowhere more manifest than it was around the world in cultural expression, art, and of course music. Incumbent structures, subaltern agency. I'm not saying incumbent structures are bankrupt, and certainly not the people are not worthy of respect and have integrity. This is not a critique. So often they say, well, you've just dismissed incumbent infrastructure. First of all, I'm not saying control is bad. I'm not saying they do it. I'm saying they imagine it. And I'm not saying the people are bad for doing that. They're just like us. They're just embedded. But so often you're forbidden from making these kinds of general critical comments because it seems to be critical of individuals when in fact you're addressing agency of a more distributed kind. Expertise, rather than, again, as we've heard inspiringly here, multiplicities of knowledges. Motivated primarily by fears, sometimes paralyzing fears. I mean, what is that familiar? Biodiversity crash, climate change catastrophe, existential risk. Or motivated by hopes. I mean, so I hope I've been accountable a little bit more detail for what I mean. And then authority, asserting authority, as a Climate Fridays for the Future demonstration said, which I witnessed, do what the science says. I think a 13-year-old holding up a sign, do what the science says. Rather than as environmentalism used to be, about bearing witness. Look at these whales, look at these dumping of toxic waste. What do you think? Not do what the science says. It's extraordinary how these things have changed over even a lifetime like my own. So I'll draw it to a conclusion. What's the answer to this? It's not, that's why I say dancing. My point isn't don't control. It's just think about the possibilities, have a story to tell about why you're doing it, try it out. Always look on that register on the right-hand side. There will always be things that can be done in order to compensate for this fixation. Instead of, and it's not that these models, this is Johann Schott's model, which Johann is a fantastic guy, and the people working in that field are great and really motivated, think very hard about these issues. But instead of these sort of acceleration, deterministic, quite explicitly models, singular visionary leadership, directed under incumbent structures, tightly disciplined expertise, emphasizing technological solutions in their strict sense, we have this kind of thing, pluralistic collective action to the fore, not to the exclusion, but to the fore, subaltern interests, not just cared for magnanimously, but leading the change, because if they're not leading it, how do we think it's going to be a progressive transformation from history? Unruly, messy practice rooted in political, cultural change, not technology. And that's where then I think you get this radical, that's where it's not disabling anymore. This is not then, it's only disabling when you have a control idea. When you see this, you think, oh, okay, it's 1,000, it's 1,000,000 flowers blooming. I mean, it's 25 with 30 zeros on the end, flowers blooming. Probably bigger than the number of atoms in the universe, actually. In the social space of possibilities, there's something to be really bottomed out there. So to be a bit more grounded at the very end, then, I'm thinking about what this entails for me, and it may be different for people in the room, but I'll just put it out there. The only way for scholarship, research, to engage in transformation sincerely is activism. That doesn't mean going on the street. Of course, going on the street can be important, but regard your work not as trying to effect impact in a policy process, not because that's bad or not worth doing in some way, but it doesn't anywhere near meet the scale of what we're talking about. It's about being activists in whatever way, in horizontal actions, like a murmuration, not going up and down to get patronage and clientele.
No power.
No power, no power. That was very challenging for me. Oh no. But, I mean, actually, power breaks down, as we know, into many different dimensions. So, it's absolutely about power in a way that I think you were meaning. So, let me just draw out what I mean by these knowing doings, looking with what I call instead of the eagle eye, where the world of transformation is on down below, we're looking down on it from our lofty vantage points of grand professors, or looking down and we see how it'll work here, and other people buy into the justification story that we give them. Instead, we're much more like worms, immersed. We don't know exactly what it involves. It's just about moves, and we're making moves in our way. You're making moves in your way. I didn't like that move, but that's quite a good move. That kind of thing. And I've collected some of these in one paper. It wasn't a particularly good chapter, but and it's all from the civil society experience for movements, how they think about it. I used to work for Greenpeace, so I saw in the 80s, because of an amazing window of opportunity, the most extraordinary things happened in that period because the machine lost control for a while. And these are the kinds of things people talk about in my limited experience. Knowing, doing, moves that are not about knowing or doing, but both. And they shape the murmuration, which is about knowing and doing at the same time. So let me illustrate this a bit. Political judo. use the strength of your opponent against them. Just because they're strong doesn't mean they can prevail. So for instance, on reducing pesticide use, the professed core motivation for GM crops in the 90s by the big corporations, Monsanto, Syngenta, was to reduce pesticide use. You go, oh great, oh wonderful, you want to do that. So let's compare then, in your view, not us, the different strategies for reducing pesticide use, using any number of methods that can just do this comparison. And they just, it's so delicious that even senior executives in these companies, if you engage with them in good faith, respectfully, they go through your process, and they end up concluding, yeah, well, of course, organic farming is better. Well, I just don't normally think about that. So they admit. You don't have to criticize them. They admit, well, it would be better, but I'm Monsanto, so I'm making these things. Trojan horses, things that look like, so many of us work with these techniques. The quantitative-qualitative divide is an opportunity. Use techniques that look quantitative to make qualitative points. Don't sit on the boundaries saying, well, we hate these quantitative techniques. What's the problem is aggregative techniques use quantification in ways that disaggregate, in ways I think several projects have used here, and you're really subversive. You get into the citadel. There's a technique called multi-criteria mapping, for instance, where we got sponsored by Unilever to use this and got to see British government ministers because it got through the gates. But when it was inside, like the Trojan horse, it unfolded and it was no longer, oh, we thought this was quantification. Yeah, it is. It's just showing you the radical uncertainties that all your advisory committees, Minister, hide from you. Your own advisors disagree massively. Here's the picture. How safe do you feel getting that advice by the one person who wants an OBE, a British award, from you? How safe do you feel with that diversity hidden from you? So Trojan horses. From China, try for edge balls, talking to inspirational Chinese scholar activists about agricultural issues, as it turns out, but pesticide contamination in rivers. I heard from them about edge balls. In China, ping pong is a national game. If you want to win a game of ping pong, get the ball on the edge of the table and it comes off unpredictably. So you're working under authoritarian regime, as we all are actually, more than we think. But of course there's a difference in China. They see more clearly than maybe we do, get the ball on the edge moves back. And then I think it's the final one, civilizing hypocrisies. John Law, a Marxist sociologist, came up with this really nice phrase that instead of criticizing hypocrisy, use it. So for instance, sustainability. Yes, sustainability is hypocritical. It's not actually the intentions of the world community and business to do these things. But the fact that they are making themselves accountable gives ratchets and opportunities for horizontal action that you can use. So it's a hypocrisy, but if we say it's a hypocrisy, we want something else that's more pure, then you just completely deny the political traction of working and destabilizing their own hypocrisies. That was my defense of sustainability. So I hope I've substantiated then, and in a rather breathless way, I'm sorry it's been so fast, so why I'm interested in control and care and branching pathways for transformation in the way I said. So thank you very much.